Good evening, everyone. We have already covered the military aspects of the conflict and also the likelihood of the balance of power in our region. I shall confine myself to the diplomatic aspects, and that's an experience I've had for a long time. From 1979 to 2004, I was in one agency or the other of the United Nations. And one word which we spoke most in this long period is Jammu and Kashmir. In fact, one can say that our interaction with the world was dominated by this idea. Because when we went to the United Nations, the case of Jammu and Kashmir, people felt that it was unnecessary. In fact, it is characterized as one of Nehru's follies. The choice that he had was to fight a war. Perhaps it would have lasted for a few days and taken back the Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. That option he had. And his military advisors did tell him that it was possible to do that in a few days. But if you look at Pandit Nehru's mind and what he was and what he wanted to be known as the new Prime Minister of India, he was not going to fight a war. And the idealist that he was had also great faith in the United Nations. And the United Nations had just been formed. We are a founder member of the United Nations. And when this question arose, naturally he felt that it is our responsibility and duty to take this to the United Nations. Well, that is done, therefore we don't need to argue as to whether it was right or not. But this particular issue, when it was taken to the UN, India had the feeling that we are right because Jammu and Kashmir had already become part of India and we had to defend it when there was aggression. But at the same time, we wanted to leave it to the United Nations to find a solution. But then we discovered that the United Nations is not a judicial body. It is not even a body which deals with military matters. It is a political body. And we found that everyone in the United Nations, particularly the permanent members, tried to see what they could get out of this conflict. So it was not to resolve the conflict or to side with India or Pakistan. This was the first battle in the international arena as to how the permanent members might or would like to manipulate events in the world for their own satisfaction. And that is what we have seen all these years. Without going into the details of whatever has happened in the UN, we know that we have evolved our position since we took it to the United Nations. And with the similar agreement, we agreed that this would be bilaterally resolved and not at the UN. But Pakistan made this as part of their foreign policy and to make this issue as internationalized as possible so that India would be seen in a particular way. And so we have a large number of resolutions, references, conventions over the last many years. And so a body of literature has been formed around the world. And if people do not seem to take positions on this issue, which you might see when these occur, a number of points have got frozen in history. So what was Pakistan's objective at this moment? It was merely to internationalize the issue. I do not think that they had expected that some change could take place. But this has happened every time there are important events in the world. After the early stages, Pakistan made a very active bid to raise this as an international issue soon after the Cold War. Because after the Cold War, the world was going to be realigned. And India, as you know, was depending on Soviet Union's veto to make sure that we do not see any decisions of Security Council which would be against us. So with the Soviet Union having diminished, they thought this was an opportunity for them to bring the Kashmir issue to the United Nations. And they did a very determined effort to do so. And we had to fight it in every committee of the United Nations. And we succeeded in going back to the concept that this should be resolved peacefully between the two countries. And now, since the global order is changing again, in fact, the old global order has disappeared and the new one is not born, you may notice that every country in the world is taking positions in order to qualify themselves to be an important part of the new global order, which we do not know what it will be. That is the reason why alliances are breaking. People are taking positions but not always joining any of the group. And so the new world order, when it emerges, who would be in what place is the debate that is going on internationally. We have our own idea of our position. And every country, of course, the major battle is between US and China and Russia as to who would take the leadership of the new world order. And Pakistan thought this was the opportunity to bring this issue once again into the United Nations arena. So my view is that this terrorist attack was staged basically to make it internationalized once again, to bring this issue to the United Nations Security Council and have this battle to see who will support India and who will support Pakistan. That is the game they have been playing. So we have to see it in that context. And if that was their objective, I must say they have succeeded. They have succeeded in bringing this issue to the fore. And so a new debate, they were expecting that a new debate will take place in the Security Council. To that extent, they have succeeded. Now we are all talking about Jammu and Kashmir, which we are not doing in the past. So to that extent, they have succeeded in their mission. So in any calculation of the new world order, they would like to see where India stands and where Pakistan stands. That was their objective. Our objective was different. Of course, we have opposed internationalization. But at the same time, our concern was to punish the terrorists and those who support them. And since that was our objective, we have attained our objective also. So in a sense, we can say both Pakistan and India have been successful in our respective missions. So, but how did we react? Did we completely oppose internationalization? Or did we fall into the trap that Pakistan laid for us by going out of our way to go send missions abroad in order to explain the positions to various countries? In my view, that I think was a different approach than we have done before. We deal with the military situation. There is a situation that the world will see where we stand. Everyone will know where this started off. And therefore, was there any reason for us to go out and explain to many countries? I think it was more because of internal political reasons. So that apart, When you did that, now we have many reports of how our delegations were received by other countries. But you will notice that no country has explicitly supported either Pakistan or India. Of course, China has supported Pakistan explicitly. Turkey has done that. And then Azerbaijan, that's all. These are not so, that was to be expected. In the case of India, you have not heard anyone saying, we support India. Even after these conversations that we had in different parts of the world, they listen to you, they very patiently listen to you and understand. But nobody has come up with saying that, yes, we support India. And this is not because we are not popular in the world, not because we are not powerful in the world, not because we are not required by other countries. But this whole situation is frozen in time. Like, for example, 2 or 3 points that our delegations were asked to explain to other countries. We have the briefing. The first thing that we wanted to tell the world was that Kashmir is an integral part of India. But this is something that nobody in the world has accepted. The only country which supported the position that Jammu and Kashmir is part of India was the Soviet Union under Khrushchev. And that was the basis of the better relationship that we established with the Soviet Union, because Khrushchev went to Kashmir and declared that this is part of India. But why are the others not doing that? Because over these years, we have created literature, we have created maps, which all indicate that there is a problem which has to be resolved between the two countries. And if you look at the map of Jammu and Kashmir published by the United Nations, there is an inscription about the border which has been delineated there, that the final situation of the border situation has not been agreed upon between the two countries. So the fact that India is an integral part of, Kashmir is an integral part of India, is a matter on which the world will be reluctant to take a position. Because the map itself, which has been supported by us, says that this is to be determined. So how can we say that's an integral part of India? So we are very convinced about it. But this cardinal mistake which was made at that time as a kind of compromise that this will be settled in the future, and to say that this border is not final, is before every country in the world. So when you go and tell them that this is an integral part of India, they would not oppose it. They would not say it is not so. But they would continue to insist that this is something which has to be settled between India and Pakistan. So this argument of integral part of India is something very special to us. And because of this particular situation, everybody looks at the situation when the border would be settled. The second point that we are making to the world is that we are fighting terrorism. There is no problem of any country in the world saying that we object to terrorism. And that is what our delegation has reported. They all said they are opposed to terrorism. But what we have to remember is that in the history of the United Nations, till today, terrorism has not been defined. This has been tried very many times. I myself have sat through several discussions how to establish what terrorism is. And it's not possible to define it because in the United Nations history, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. They point out to us that didn't you support national movements in Africa, in Namibia, in South Africa? Did you not support freedom fighters in Sri Lanka? Are they terrorists or not? So in this long history of the United Nations, there has never been an agreement as to what terrorism is because of this conflict. And so when we say we attack terrorists, or we want to destroy them, they would not entirely support that idea. They will say, yes, terrorism has to be fought, all kinds of terrorism is not acceptable. But in their mind, the question arises as to whether what is happening in Kashmir is freedom fighters or terrorists because of the lack of definition. So here again, this is the danger of internationalization. Our argument that we are fighting terrorists is taken with a pinch of salt by the international community. So what we see is there have been occasions when terrorism became very significant in part of history in the negotiations. And 9/11 was the obvious time when everybody was keen that something should be done about terrorism. More than 20 years ago, we had presented a convention on comprehensive convention on terrorism to the General Assembly. And it is still there. It has been debated many times, but it was not approved. But when 9/11 happened, there was a great demand for terrorists to be dealt with. And since because of the lack of definition, a comprehensive decision on terrorism could not be taken either in the General Assembly or the Security Council. And so we started dealing with hijacking. There is a separate convention on hijacking, separate convention on trade, etc., etc. But still, there is no unanimous view on how terrorism should be dealt with. So whether a particular country has the right to fight terrorism to the finish and say that an act of terrorism will be considered as a war, as we have now put forward to the world, is also clouded in all these various documents we have. So we cannot expect the international community to accept our arguments. They may be sympathetic to you, but at the same time, this is the reason why nobody takes a very open position on this. So where is the answer? Because every time there is a terrorist attack, we attack back, and we now have the new scheme or decision that we will not hesitate to go beyond the line of control. During the Kargil war, we were all complimented by the rest of the world for not crossing the line of control. I was in Washington those days, and we went to various groups of people, senators, congressmen, and others. And that they kept complimenting us that we had not crossed the line of control, and we accepted it as a compliment. And that is why President Clinton got Nawaz Sharif to Washington and asked him to stop the Kargil war. He actually told him that this was an ultimatum. And the only thing that Nawaz Sharif could plead with Clinton was that, yes, we will stop the Kargil war, but you agree to take up Jammu and Kashmir issue with the Indians. Because when you speak to the Indians, it is like speaking to a blank wall. And of course, President Clinton did not take that responsibility. He said, yes, we will strengthen the discussion. So what I'm trying to say is, because of all these various documents and resolutions and discussions, a clear position will not be taken by individual countries. And that is what we have seen. Of course, diplomatically, you can always say things which pleases everybody. But this is the reason why internationalization of Jammu and Kashmir is not in our interest. So what can we do? What we can do is only what we are doing now. That is to militarily stop terrorist attacks on India. And not to expect an international reaction which is favorable to us. It will not be against us, but at the same time, it will not be favorable to us. And to this, a new dimension has been added when India and Pakistan became nuclear weapon states. Because we are not nuclear weapon states legally, but it is acknowledged that both of us have nuclear warheads. So there is a near thesis that when there are nuclear weapons in any country, no conventional war can be fought. And probably that is the reason why we haven't had as many wars as could have happened during this period. Because after 1998, since Pakistan and India became nuclear weapon states, the whole world started considering Jammu and Kashmir to be a hotspot. And the focus was always on seeing that the nuclear strength of both India and Pakistan should be limited. Pakistan, of course, got all their nuclear technology from China. They even spread it to other countries, while our nuclear technology is entirely indigenous. And more than that, India has what is called the non-first use doctrine. We have declared that even though we have the capacity to use nuclear weapons, we shall not use it unless we are attacked. Because it is a theoretical matter whether we will be alive to attack after somebody has used nuclear weapons on you. But still the doctrine is that we will not attack. The non-first use is a doctrine that we have accepted, which China has also accepted also. But Pakistan specifically says that they have the right to attack with nuclear weapons because their military is not entirely capable of dealing with the Indian threat. So for them, nuclear weapons are weapons of use if necessary. And in our case, of course, there is the understanding that even when we say non-first use of nuclear doctrine, we also have an understanding that if it comes to a major threat to our security, we will not be restrained in that case. So this again is another issue about which the world is worried when India and Pakistan start fighting. And here again, they kept saying, even after the war started, that if necessary, we will not refrain from using nuclear weapons. So the whole idea of the border, the second aspect of what terrorism is, and the danger of nuclear use between India and Pakistan. So this makes the world concerned about what happens in India. So when something like this happens, immediate reaction of any country which has any influence on us is to somehow bring about a ceasefire. Because we do not know who brought the ceasefire. As far as India is concerned, it is the Pakistani DGMO who requested for a ceasefire. But President Trump declared it even before we declared it, saying that I brought about this. Could be. I will not deny that. There must have been conversations between us. But we may not have negotiated it with the Americans, but it is only natural for big powers to stop anything happening between India and Pakistan because of the larger danger of a nuclear attack. Of course, our Prime Minister made it very clear that you cannot blackmail us on the basis of nuclear weapons. We will deal with it. Yes, that we will deal with it, certainly. So, when we talk of the diplomatic impact of what has happened, we should be aware that it is not a straightforward favoring India or Pakistan as far as the rest of the world is concerned. Our representatives went to Colombia, very friendly country for us. But what Colombia had done was they had sent a sympathetic message to Pakistan, simply saying that we are sorry to hear that's happened and the loss of lives in Pakistan. And we considered this was an unfriendly statement and very quickly said we are going to withdraw that statement. That was not difficult for Colombia. But would Colombia say, we sympathize with you because you have this threat from terrorism? So we need to understand the complications in negotiations bilaterally or multilaterally with Pakistan, because this whole history of 70 years. And so any discussion on who supports you or who does not support you or what is India's position in the world has to be decided on the basis of this whole structure or the web of language which has been generated in the United Nations. And in the UN, as you know, words are the most important. So what I'm trying to say is simply that we should not expect any support from any country on what we think is right because of the internationalization is the issue. So when you have anything like this, it is better that we deal with them directly and deal with them militarily rather than go around trying to convince other people. Because other people will not be convinced because they have chapter and verse of the United Nations documentation. To say that what we are claiming is not entirely true. So that is the picture that you have. So what is the answer? The answer is simply that you have to deal with terrorism militarily. Bilateral negotiations we have stopped because we say that you cannot fight wars and at the same time talk. So we are not talking to Pakistan. SARC is completely destroyed because we don't participate in SARC exchanges. So the bilateral chapter is not open because we ourselves do not want bilateral talks at this stage. And they are saying that they will withdraw from the Simla agreement. There is nothing to withdraw Simla agreement because Pakistanis had always said that Simla agreement did not exist. Once they assassinated Bhutto, then there was no Simla agreement because he was the one who initialed it, not that he signed it. So this is going to be a long problem for us. We have to certainly try diplomatically to meet these issues, whether this border question can be resolved in some form, whether the question of terrorism can be more defined, or whether the nuclear balance is obtained. But in the meantime, the only way to deal with it is to have Operation Sindoor kind of action in order to reduce the risk for India's existence. And at the same time, continue not to internationalize the issue by raising this with too many countries. And because it is difficult to break that barrier of all these definitions and discussions that has taken into the United Nations. So this is just one aspect. This is not the full story. But I thought I would mention these three things from my own experience because we have been talking about this for years together. And when we fight within the committees between India and Pakistan, nobody takes the floor and says anything to support or criticize us. That is another interesting thing you'll notice. In the General Assembly, we go on. I was the main Pakistan basher for 3 years in New York. We used to fight each other for a long time. They'll patiently hear. But not a single delegation will get up and say, Pakistan is right or India is right. So this is the sad international situation. We should be aware of it when we talk of getting support from country A or country B. Thank you very much. I can answer questions.